So, welcome to this Ask Me Anything section. This is the March answers session where I will go through everything that's been left as a comment, question throughout March. And if you have something you'd like me to answer in April, you can put it as a comment or a question underneath this video. And at the beginning of May, I'll take some time to answer them, to go through them. So Linda Miss Kelly says, thank you very much. Thank you too. Linda Yamin says, thank you for these videos. I learned so much from you. I wanted to ask you this question for a while, but it seems a bit silly. Can you speak to this? What is television, Netflix, movies, our favorite shows? Are they our thoughts projected onto certain characters? What if we are drawn to characters, even the villains? Or a violent show with lots of blood and death? Or what if we refuse to watch such shows, not wanting to see such things? Is that a form of denial? Can you help with this? Thanks for any insights. Well, I think human beings love stories, don't we? Whether they're in our own mind. At first, of course, we all love those stories. It's only later we want to move beyond the internal stories. We love them on a screen too. We love them in a book, and we love them on the TV and things like that. And I think to a certain extent, we're all drawn towards, excuse me, if we're all drawn towards all of the characters, if there's a real good guy, a hero or woman, then we naturally, I remember growing up, I used to watch Wonder Woman. And I used to want to be Wonder Woman, as I'm sure a lot of people did. And, same is true there were some other shows that we immediately kind of identify with that character to some degree, just as we have identified with the sense of being a separate being. And the same is probably true for identifying with the villains or the evil characters to some degree. It allows us to play out some sense of the lower vibrations in our own psyche and our own individuality that we might not ever act out ourselves, but we get to explore the human psyche through these kind of insights, especially if the show is well written, well done, or the book, anything like that. And it can be educational and informal, and just like we might explore that in our dream state at night times, things that we would never really experience or want to experience in the waking state. So I don't think it is there's anything wrong with sort of enjoying the good and the bad in terms of a movie or a show. And as to the rest of your question here, what if we refuse to watch such shows, not wanting to see such things? That's totally okay too, isn't it? There's times for me when I could watch things like that, and times when I couldn't, and also times where I wanted to and times where I didn't want to. So not necessarily the same thing. I might watch something, choose not to watch something because I really just don't want to watch it. It's not interesting to me, but it's not a form of denial. Let's say there's something on the TV that's got some blood and some violence. It might just be that that's not what I like. Or it might be that I'm avoiding watching it because I don't want it to stir something up inside me. And, whatever that is inside, we'll be able to tell whether it's denial or not based on how it feels. If I just turn away from a TV show, I'm not really interested in that, I don't want to watch it, it'll feel good. If I turn away out of denial, there might be some kind of subtle sense in the body that some tightening or some lowering of the vibration. So I'm not saying that you have to suddenly, okay, I'm going to watch this now, I'm going to put myself through this. But it's enough you might never watch that program. It's enough to kind of notice some denial, and you can look at what that is inside that you're denying. In my own kind of awakening, right from my very first, I couldn't watch anything scary, violent, or anything like that, because it would give me nightmares straight away. The whole theme of my life was fear, anger, and unworthiness, as I'm sure it is for many of us. I remember my parents watching even Doctor Who my older sister watching it, and I was hiding behind a sofa as a child because I was so scared. And really that kind of, I couldn't watch any horror movies or anything as a separate being, but that's kind of changed. I can watch that stuff. It's not especially interesting. Sometimes I might watch something like that, sometimes not. And even if you find yourself identifying with a character, that just really means it's kind of a good show. It's a good movie. And when you switch it off, you don't really continue to identify when the episode's over. It's just a bit of fun, isn't it? These days, I can pretty much watch anything, but I still have my favorites. You know, I still love, always will be a sci-fi geek, and you can never, that'll never go. So even if it is denial, just, it's okay, isn't it? You'll watch something like that if and when you want to, if and when you're ready. And same goes for looking at the news and things like that. There's no point deliberately exposing yourself to something that's going to upset you before you have the tools to deal with that. So I hope that helps. Pamela Rawlinson, always helpful and informative, Helen. A box of tools to unlock stuck thoughts and ideas which are ready to be released and let go of. Namaste. So I'm guessing that's in a comment based on what I said last month. Thank you. Jan Avi says, greetings from New Zealand. Greetings. After many years of spiritual evolving, I recently came upon some non-duality. I have a slight dyslexia. There's nothing wrong with your typing. Sometimes the words jump around as I'm reading. After many years of spiritual evolving, I recently came upon some non-duality teachings which have sparked a deep desire for awakening in this lifetime. I am delighted to have been led to your clear and beautiful teachings and have been diving into the YouTube videos like a kid in a candy shop. Each one gives me an opportunity to see and know more clearly, but I want to ensure that my random approach is a useful one. Can you please suggest a specific pathway of your teachings in addition to the core teachings that I can follow to fully know and live as the true nature? Many thanks and namaste, Helen, Jan. So wonderful. And what seems random to the separate sense of self is not really random at all. If the next video that's suggested on YouTube is going to be seemingly random, but it is not really, as I'm sure we've all experienced. It's vibrationally aligned with where we're at, what we need to hear. And in that process, the random approach sometimes is the best. But in terms of structure, it's sort of a what should I be heading towards type of thing. For me, the core teachings, absolutely. If you can do your best to learn those 3 skills, as I'm showing in the core teachings, which is a playlist. If you're not sure what I'm talking about and you're watching this, on this channel, there is a playlist called Core Teachings, and it gives a meditation, contemplation, self-inquiry. And then there's a 4th one, which is kind of all 3 wrapped together, which might be helpful at some point. So those would be the first 3 things to really begin to master. Not master, because even for me now, there is still a deepening of those, but just a general ability to kind of contemplate is very helpful, to meditate in a very direct way as we're doing here with these teachings, and to self-inquire as well is also very direct. And then I would look at, first of all, proving 3 things to yourself. Firstly is that you're not a separate being. So using self-inquiry to try to find the separate being that you are. And when you fail to find it, you find only the empty nothingness that is the noumenon, the self-awareness, stillness, consciousness, presence, whatever you want to call it. When you look for yourself, you find a body and thoughts and emotions. But do you find someone, an entity, that a separate being, that they belong to those thoughts? The one that says my body is a separate being. And that should be number 1 thing that you should try to prove to yourself experientially. Of course, we know it up here, but and that's just a case of looking and not finding. It seemed like there's a separate being here, but when I really look, can I find where it stops, where it is, where it isn't this separate being? And then I would be set about proving to yourself that what you really are, the awareness, the consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is unlimited. It's everywhere. It's the only thing that is. There's only one being, and that is you, or it's the same one being appearing as all these body minds. You can do that very quickly by, there's lots of helpful videos in the self-inquiry playlist too, trying to find where you stop, not your body, but you. There's awareness here. Where is that awareness? Can you say, is it only inside? Is it outside? Or does it not really fit those categories? And as I look where my awareness actually is, and perhaps maybe even more importantly, where it isn't, where it stops. If you and I sat in a room together, these two bodies, would there be really a point where my awareness stopped halfway across the room and yours started, or something like halfway across the distance between the two bodies, or something like that? This idea is so pervasive that we never question it. Where does my awareness actually stop? Does it have edges, boundaries? My body does, but what about me, the awareness? So trying to find out that you're not a separate being, you can't actually find a separate being. And then exploring the second thing, what actually is there, this awareness, as I'm calling it right now. And then the third thing, which might take a little while longer, but you'll already be experiencing a great deal of peace when you complete those other two, is that everything, proving that everything is this awareness. So there isn't really any forms independent of this awareness. There isn't really anything to be aware of, is the third thing to prove. And you can do that just by looking at objects, thoughts, emotions, objects outside, like a table, a car, a house, a wall, and your body even, and asking what that really is in a kind of contemplative way. And you'd be quite surprised when you come back to, it really isn't anything other than me. It isn't anything at all. It is the nothingness, the awareness appearing as something. So have a look at where you're at in that, in those three. And those three will, profound freedom when you really know those experientially. And they all kind of lead on from each other, but just to kind of make it clearer in terms of how to proceed. And just begin to ask me questions. If I were in your position, I'd ask me as many questions as possible. And any teacher, I would make as much use of them as I can. Don't be afraid to ask. There are no silly questions. Certainly no questions to be embarrassed by. So as you're working through these three and you seem to get stuck, ask if you either put it under here, or if you can join a live satsang, you can send a question in to be read aloud at satsang as well, if you'd rather it be anonymous. So here to help always. So I hope that helps. Generally, though, the random approach is going to be the best because it isn't random. The self knows what it's doing. Nira says, dear Helen, I have a question. What is the cause of thoughts? Much love. Well, the simple answer is there isn't a cause of thoughts. They're just kind of arising out of. It is the shape, the formlessness. It is the shapelessness taking a shape. And just like, what's the cause of rain falling or clouds forming? There isn't really a cause, is there? That it's just happening. It's not like somebody decides, okay, now I'm going to form a cloud and now it's going to start raining. There's no person in here, no separate being deciding to think. Paradoxically, the idea that there is someone here deciding things generates more thoughts. So beginning to just witness the thoughts and beginning to question the truth of some of those thoughts that seem very pervasive and persistent, then we'll begin to get some distance from them. There's kind of two answers, but they still, they might sound opposite, these answers, but they are the same. So that's not necessary to understand, but the first answer I want to give is there's no cause at all. They're just, it'd be like asking, why is my cat a cat? Well, that's just the shape that the formlessness took there. Why does this body look like this? It just is the way the formlessness appeared in that way. There's no decisive entity that's deciding, okay, today I'm going to think about this. There's no cause. And there's a sense that I'm a separate being. When we really believe that we're a separate being, a second answer, we have to explain what all the rest of this is. If it's not me, it has to be something else. If I'm not everywhere, I'm only someone somewhere, then everything else out there is separate to me. And I have to begin to explain what all of this is. So I begin to think about it all and explain it all in my mind. I give it labels. This is, a name of this person. This is a table. This is a chair. This is a body. This is a thought. This is an emotion. This is a planet. This is a black hole. This is a universe. It's on and on and on. So as soon as a sense of otherness arises, thoughts will have to happen, because otherness, things outside of me, separate to me that I can't control, will bring great fear. The mind will go into action to try to make myself safer. How do I navigate through my experience so that I'm safer? It's really the cause of all thoughts. So when a sense of separateness goes, along with it, the sense of otherness, so does 95% at least of the thoughts. I hope that helps. One Love Henry 1 says, hello, Helen. Thanks in advance for your answer. So helpful and direct. My question is around karma. It's not often, but I'm experiencing real-time negative karma boomerangs for negative thoughts and intentions held towards other beings. Good boomerangs are probably happening too, but they don't stick out like a sore thumb. Is this a symptom of waking up, lol? So I'm laughing because I remember this, where it suddenly became very apparent to me that any kind of negative intention, or somebody pulls out in front of me in traffic and there's out of my mouth comes a word that I'd rather not repeat, that would kind of bounce back to me, because the more I realize that they are also me, behaving like someone who could drive better, let's just say, is going to boomerang back, as you said. And of course, as you also said, there are those positive ones coming back, but they just appear as positive, surprising, delightful things that happen by chance, as we say. But anything that we send out is going to come back because there is nobody out there. And there's a point for me where I became very aware of this, as you're saying. I'm laughing because I remember spending about 2 or 3 weeks after I really got this, really trying to think good thoughts about everyone, and some people, that's just extraordinarily challenging, isn't it? And it's exhaustive amount of effort and energy trying to police the contents of my thought stream. And I was doing so well, and then you go drive to get your food shopping and somebody jumps in the parking space that you were just about to go into, and that's all lost. So what's the way out of this? It is a part of waking up, is to realize it's always been going on. We just haven't been noticing it, really. Now we're super aware of it because we're beginning to realize it's all me. And with clarity of waking up, however far you've got in that process, you'll be much more aware of what's happening to the body and mind. Most of our lives, we have spent so lost in our thoughts that we've missed every experience, every moment of reality. There's very little attention gone on what's actually occurring around me, even to my own body. It might have been really uncomfortable for a very long time, and I just haven't noticed because I've been so lost in my thoughts. So it's been going on for a long time, forever. You're just really kind of noticing it now, and it might speed up and become more often as a way of saying, hey, this is something you might want to look at. My advice would be just to notice that that is not you. If you identify as the thinker, then you'll get a lot more of this positive and negative sort of boomeranging going on. In the awareness, as the awareness, there isn't anyone else at all. There isn't anything. There isn't even a separate you to have these thoughts. So there's just awareness, which is everywhere at all times and could not be absent from anywhere, also known as the self, also known as you, and nobody else to think about, positively or negatively. That's the shortest shortcut. But an intermediary step would be, I'm not the thinker. It's really nothing to do with me, the content of the mind. And I don't need to judge myself if my mind is judging. If I judge myself for judging others negatively, then I am being the mind in that moment. The self would just completely lovingly pat the mind on the head and say, there, and it wouldn't get involved in that way. It wouldn't get involved in the same way. So I hope that helps. Chris Hayes says, hi, Helen, so much love to you. Thank you. Much love to you too. I wanted to share an epiphany from today. I heard you tell a woman to ask the question, what is this illness trying to show me? I then applied this question to my own illness with my eyesight, which is getting worse as time goes on. When I contemplated this question, the answer I received was a subtle sense that I was resisting seeing who I truly am, being that is not separate. I think I'm afraid to see that I'm not a separate being. Is this possible? And why on earth would I be afraid to see this? I am now asking, is it really true that I'm afraid to see that I'm not a separate being? Not quite sure how this question is resonating with me so far. So really good breakthrough there. You're starting to really see, no pun intended, that our physical senses are a reflection of our inner seeing, our inner hearing. Awareness is kind of all the senses at once, and then it seems to separate into when it appears in a human being, it seems to separate itself into the five senses. And of course, sight is the one that we're talking about here. But yes, to a certain extent, all of us are afraid. We might be sitting in satsang, we might be really trying to see the truth. And at the same time, there is some counter, there's an intention, desire to see the truth, and a counter intention underneath, unconscious to us at that current point that we're unaware of, that is really not wanting to see because of what that would mean. So if I see that I am not a separate being and that I never have been, that's great for the self. Of course, it wants to recognize itself. The ego, the egoic sense of self, the separate sense of self, mind, I'm using all those terms synonymously, is inherently invested in not seeing because it is invested in its stories that I'm not good enough, that life isn't fair, that I'm not safe, that I'm unlovable, nobody likes me, nobody needs me, whatever it is that we're kind of holding on to inside. When we see deeply and clearly that we are not separate to anyone or anything, that really will begin to facilitate a letting go of these stories. So of course, something inside of us is resistant to doing that because it's deeply invested in those stories, because it keeps experiencing them. Because you're not really an ego, you're really the self already. We keep experiencing, and we're infinitely powerful. Whatever story I'm believing, I'll keep experiencing. My mind says, but I believe that because it keeps happening. But the self says, well, it kind of keeps happening because you're holding on to that. This is a reflection out there of what's going on in here. So as I begin to release these stories, I begin to experience a different experience. Something is going to resist that unconsciously. And once you start to begin to be aware of that going on inside, and one of the ways that we see that is by what's going on in our experience. So the body is a very literal metaphor, a representation of your own self. So if I don't want to hear something, if I don't want to hear the truth, I might find myself with an issue with my hearing. If I don't really want to see on some unconscious level, of course I do consciously, then I might find myself with a vision problem. And Louise Hay's wonderful work is great for helping me understand things going on. I had problems with my shoulders. I could see that I thought that life was a burden. I had to carry too much. I was making life a burden with my attitude, and most especially my awakening. So just seeing that that resistance is there brings it into the conscious light of your own recognition. And the key is to not judge it. Okay, some part of me really wants this awakening, and I can see that some part of me, this very small, scared little ball of energy that we're calling ego, really doesn't want it. And that is okay. I'm only going to experience the effects of that resistance if I'm not aware of it. The moment you begin to see it, and you can really come around this by looking at, why wouldn't I, on some level at least, why wouldn't I not want to see this? Why would I want to stay in illusion? And for me, it brought up a lot when I asked that. Why would I want to sabotage, on some level, unknowingly, of course, my own awakening when I'm trying so hard to reach the truth? And, it brought up a lot. Well, I'd have to admit that I'm already worthy. I'd have to really come to see that none of my stories have been true about myself, about others. I'd have to really be willing to sort of give that up. And we might be consciously as a self willing already. You've got to be, or else you wouldn't be watching this. But some part of us is functioning against that in a subtle kind of resistance. And when we can't see that mentally, emotionally, our body has to tell us. Our body says, hey, there's some belief here that's really in opposition. It's a very low frequency compared to the truth. It's slowing down the life force energy, and it will affect whichever part of the body that the body is representing. So you see our hands represent how we handle things, our arms, how much are we feel we're carrying, are we carrying too much? Our back is how much are we supported, spine, that type of thing. Legs are about moving forward. Hips about balance and movement forward. So the body is a kind of a metaphor, and it will show you in that way. And just to see that that is going on without judgment. Nobody would do that consciously. And our ego really believes that it needs to hold on to those stories because it really is certain that they're true. So just seeing it without judgment begins to dissolve it. That is how the self would look at the ego, without judgment. It would say, I understand why you feel that way. However, I don't have to agree with you. I'm also not going to push you away because you're entitled to your opinion. But as I step away from that without judgment, I'm not at the effect any longer of this resistance. And so just doing the same for you, just sort of subtly looking at, why wouldn't I want to? What would it mean for me? If I already was living as the Buddha right now, what would that mean for me? How would my life change? And am I willing to accept that? For me, there was a lot of things came up for that. What if I was experiencing abundant flow of money and time and energy and friends and things like that? I'd have to really admit that it's not true, that I'm not good enough, something like that. And most of us still have a little resistance to that, don't we? There's always a yes, but I'll be worthy when. And this is how it plays out. I hope that is helpful. Nadia S says, I've recently become conscious of generational abusive patterns that run in my family. It explains my feeling of unworthiness and anger. It is not the first time I had at least partial realization about it, but somehow I wasn't taking it seriously, as I was following advice from spiritual practices not to believe in the story my mind is projecting and similar. I feel that the spiritual practices both helped me and delayed my realization. In general, I am not confused in how much I should be awareness and how much I should work with my personal issues. Not that I could choose, but it looks like these two states complement and contradict each other. So it's good that you're seeing this, isn't it? It's good. And to see that it's in this body mind, it must be passed down from previous generations. It's in our DNA. So I'm going to be, biologically at least, the product of my parents, and my karmic patterns will express themselves. Whatever I see going on in here, I'm going to see pretty much going on in my parents and those around me in terms of biology, at least. So when you begin to see that, it gets clearer, because they're not your karmic patterns. It's not your fault then that it's going on. It's just passed down from generation to generation. And perhaps you are the first in that generation, first body mind vehicle in that long generational line that actually can transcend it once and for all. It's just being passed down, usually behaviors that come from a sense of unworthiness, sense of separation, all of that. So yes, the advice is not to believe the stories, and that, you know, recognizing that I'm projecting and experiencing what I'm believing to be true. It is the practice. However, you're kind of right in what you said. Practice is delayed and helped your realization. What often happens is when I come to see a story isn't true, I might begin to see also in myself that I don't deserve to be treated a particular way. I might begin to see that I'm worthy of a better life experience, including with some relationships that are not so, no, they're not a reflection of my new sense of worthiness that's coming from being the self, being the awareness. So for me, I began to see the story wasn't true, but I also, the other side of that realization was to sort of gradual, but emerging and then quite insistent recognition of where people around me were not really treating me the way that I deserve to be treated. And it's not an egotistical thing. It's just some moments I surprise myself by saying something like, you know, I really would like if you didn't treat me this way, or I haven't done anything wrong. I understand that you're angry, but you don't need to put that on to me. And I never would have been able to say something like that before, or walk away from someone who was really not, didn't have my best interests at heart, let's just say. So there's a recognition that dawns within you where people are treating you in ways that you would like to be different. And that's totally a normal, natural thing, emerging from a self-love that's improving and increasing, an acceptance of your own self the way you are. You accept those others too. This is the way they are. It doesn't mean I have to expose myself to it. I can stop trying to change them, but I also don't have to kind of entertain that either. I might choose to be around people that respect me just as I am, and that value me and appreciate me. And also those that don't need me to change. You know, that's the kind of people we tend to want to hang out with. So not that I can choose, but it looks like these two states complement and contradict. I'd like to say that being the awareness and questioning the story are not really two. They're not actually different. And not just in a spiritual sense. If we look at how the self would be with a story, when it encounters an illusion, a story, mind says, that's not true, it should go away. Our separate sense of self says, I've seen that's not true, it should disappear. I know that I'm worthy, I should stop feeling unworthy when that goes away. And that should go away. The self would kind of, if it's coming up, this sense of unworthiness, the self would say, in effect, why is this happening? It would look with a kind of curiosity. It would really want to get to the bottom of why that was happening. If you really love somebody, really love them, there's an acceptance of them as they are, and also a deep curiosity to want to know them, to want to understand them, to want to know the little details about them. And the self kind of looks at a karmic pattern like this, a story, and says, what is this about? Where did it come from? And how am I sustaining it? And it's what is perpetuating this, and why would it be something that I'm trying to sustain unconsciously, of course, as we were saying with the previous question there. So how would the awareness be with the story? You can see that I can be the awareness as I am gently curious about the pattern. That is being the awareness. Sometimes being awareness or being the self, remaining as the self, means putting attention on the silence or stillness awareness. Sometimes it will mean acting like the awareness, as the awareness would do. And if I'm judging this pattern, this story, then I'm acting like the mind and I'm not being the awareness in that moment. So they are the same thing. And you get that. They complement and also contrast. But really just a deeper, broader definition of what it means to be the awareness will help here for you. And you can begin to sink into that deeper. So wonderful. Okay, so we have 3 more. Christina says, "Dear Helen, I have so much love and appreciation for you. I'm sorry for this question, but here it is anyway. If you don't want to comply with test and vaccination restrictions out there, e.g. to go on vacation, is there a spiritual way to go around this? Thanks for you." So please don't apologize for the question. If it's important to you, just like the question about the TV shows and things like that, it's important to me if it's important to you. And this is not a small thing we're talking about, isn't it? It's going on across the globe right now. So it's relevant for a lot of beings. So I would suggest the spiritual thing to do here that I would do is to look at why you don't want to comply. So I'm not saying for a second that you should comply with the regulations, etc., if you don't want to, but just looking at why you don't want to might begin to unfold some stuff inside. So for me, as a kind of explanation, I've always been self-employed throughout my whole life. I spent a year being employed. I mean, I've done part-time jobs as a teenager, but a full-time job, I spent a year doing that because I couldn't handle being told what to do. I never dealt with that very well at all. And I found it much easier. I've kind of worked on that obviously since, but I didn't like being told what to do. I felt controlled. I felt trapped. I felt manipulated. I could put in 100 different words there as well, but you get a sense of it. And I loved the sense of freedom that came from making my own decisions in business and in life and all of that. So if you look at why you don't want to do what somebody else says you must do, and here we're talking about the vaccine, etc., travel regulations, but we could be talking about anything, couldn't we, in this area subject? And why don't you want to do that? If you look at it, it's probably some sense that it makes you feel limited, restricted, controlled, manipulated, something like that. When you look at why, if you think about having to do it, what would it make you feel inside? Mine says, I feel that way. I feel controlled and manipulated because this thing out there is doing it to me. What if it's the other way around? What if it is because I'm still identifying as a separate being in this area, at least, that can be controlled and manipulated by some other being or entity or a governmental agency or fill in the blank, then I keep experiencing this because I'm believing in other that can do this, that is outside of me, something or someone to be controlled by, forced by, then I will experience that to some degree. So as you question that, then, am I really a separate being that can be controlled, or is there anything out there that can control me? And that question will seem insane at first to our mind when there's so many governmental authorities and regulations and all of that going on, especially right now in this global pandemic. But as we stick with the question and we come to realize I'm not really limited and cannot be blocked, controlled, manipulated. I am the formless infinite self that's everywhere. And there is nothing outside of me. Those that I thought would be controlling me actually are expressions of me. They are also me expressing themselves in a different way. Then this sense of feeling limited and blocked inside will go. And either something in the outer world will change, most likely, so that you can do what you need to do, want to do anyway, as a reflection of your own sense of freedom in here. I cannot be limited, blocked, controlled, manipulated. Then that you'll have that experience in your everyday life more and more. All the regulations won't change, but you won't feel limited inside with that. Most likely the outer will change in some way, but even if it doesn't, you won't be feeling this way inside. So hopefully that helps to kind of bring this to the forefront so that you know what to do with it. Okay, so we have 2 more to go. So Yassine Ms says, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Namaste, Helen. Thank you so much for these Q&A videos. They are wonderful. Thank you. My question is about visualization-based meditations, such as loving kindness from the Buddhist tradition. Do they have some validity from the non-dual perspective? I've always dismissed them because they are based on imagination and their effect, if any, feels unreal and only imagined to me. I would love to know your opinion about this. Thank you. So let me start by saying I don't really know much about the Buddhist tradition in terms of this particular area. Loving kindness. I'd assume that this is some practice of imagining yourself to project loving kindness onto others, or thinking about others in a kind and loving way as a visualization technique. I don't really know. I can only say from my own experience and what I have experienced that works for me. And the general rule of thumb is that I have experienced that if I do it as a separate being, it won't have any effect, or very, very limited. And that effect will be temporary. It will stop the moment I stop the practice. So I could sit here and as a separate, thinking I'm a separate being, projecting this onto others, my effect would be extraordinarily limited. It might affect 2 or 3 beings around me for as long as I am doing the practice only. The moment I stop and get up and go and get a cup of tea or something, the effect stops. If I do this as the self, which is everywhere, then my influence is everywhere and infinite, and it touches every single being in some small, subtle way. So more important than what practice we're doing in particular is where we're doing it from. And that's always held true for me. So if I look at the world the way it is and what's going on in the news, the situations going on right now, as a separate being, I will be very disempowered to do anything at all. If I spend a few moments imagining that there be peace in the hearts of those that are really suffering around the world, knowing that they're not separate to me, they are also appearances in me, just like this body mind is too, then my effect is going to be much more profound, because the I that's doing the practice is not at all limited. And it may seem like that visualization is going on here in this body mind only, but it's really going on a non-local level. It's going on in the every-awareness, as the every-awareness. Just like if you were to, if there was a general database of human consciousness, anything you upload to that consciousness will be accessible by everyone in that consciousness, because there's only one. There's like a cloud storage of good intentions and all of negative intentions, of course, but the power, the upload power, for want of a better phrase in this analogy, of the self, the noumenon, the pure awareness, is infinitely more powerful. And once you've done that, once you've sent that out, it stays there forever. It doesn't stop when the practice stops, when the efforting stops. So you could really make a difference when you get this, when you see this, that you are not a separate being doing this practice. You are the infinite being already, wishing loving kindness in this example upon others. Again, I might not know exactly, I don't know exactly what the practice is. I might not have it completely, but you get the sense of what I'm saying, right? Any practice that is well intended from the place of non-separation will have a profound effect. And that effect will be just by virtue of the fact that you're not separating yourself to anybody at all. Yes, there are some human expressions of me that I would prefer not to be around. I love them for who they are, what they are. Their essence is also my essence. Doesn't necessarily mean I'd want to spend time with those beings. But nonetheless, my influence as the self is going to touch everything, not just human beings, plants, animals, insentient things, all of that. So I hope that helps you to kind of resolve that inside yourself. Okay, last but not least is SK, who says, hello, Helen. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. This month, my question is on non-judgment. How do I stay neutral? Sometimes I seem to get sucked into the stories faster than I can blink, especially when I have an emotional response. I remind myself it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. But those emotions, what's the best way to handle this? Oops, is that a judgment too? Thank you so much. Love and light to all. So perhaps the answer to this is much simpler than you even realize. So I want to stop judging, says mind. I want to stop. I want to come to a place where I'm not judging, says the seekingness inside us. We've heard that awakening is a place where we don't judge anymore, and our mind is still very much judging. And whether it's judging people out there, judging ourselves, judging an emotion as good, bad, wanted, not wanted, a thought, whatever it's judging in here or out there, which is the same really, but it's judging, it's discerning, it's judging, it's evaluating and labeling categories. This one's wanted, so it goes over here. This one's not wanted, so it goes over there. This one's good, it goes onto this pile. That one's bad, it goes onto that one. And it seems to be a logical thing to, and a good thing to want to stop judging. But if mind is, if the judgment thing is dividing everything into, dividing the one thing, the one being, the noumenon, the self, into two, divides it into wanted and not wanted, good and bad, and also awakened, unawakened type of thing. So how can something, a mechanism that divides it into two, be able to ever stop doing that? If its very essence is to divide things into categories, can it stop doing that? The most that the mind can do is come to see that it cannot be other than it is. And that sounds kind of like very non-dual, but really to recognize that the mind is a divisive implement. That's what it does. If I asked you where you think you are in your awakening, you could give me a certain snapshot. Then I ask you where you'd like to be in your awakening, you could give me another snapshot image of you. And there you would have divided yourself into two right there. So it's simpler and easier than stopping judging is identifying as that which cannot judge and never has, because it cannot divide into two. So the moment someone walks past me, mind says something about their hair or their clothes or something like that, you know, or I wouldn't have chosen that car, or I wish they hadn't said that to me, or whatever it says, you have a response in that moment, two responses. You can either judge the judging, and in which case, why am I still doing that? Why am I still judging? I wish I wasn't judging, that type of thing. And it renews this desire to move beyond it. But if I'm judging the judging, is that coming from mind? Or is that coming from the self? What would the self do? It would totally allow the mind to be as it is in that moment, judgmental or not. Whatever thoughts, whether the mind is thinking the thought currently, I am the infinite self that is all there is, or I really wouldn't chose those, I really wouldn't have bought those shoes, they don't look good on her, or why is he driving like that, you know? And the self would kind of go, well, that's just how the mind is being today. That's what the mind is, that's what the mind does. And it wouldn't push against it. It would just kind of, a flower is a flower, the mind is the way the mind is. And it would be kind of like that. So in any moment, there's something that judges within you. And there's something that totally accepts that judgment without judgment. And it's always, mind always says, because again, it divides into two. Should I be judging or not? And of course, it decides that not is better and sets about trying to make itself into something it cannot be. And in doing so, ignores that which already is where it's trying to get to. So both, always both is the answer. So there's some part of me that's going to judge emotions, people, everything. And then there's some part of me that can never and never has judged, because it doesn't see any difference in that way. There isn't two things for it to weigh against each other, the awareness. So for a while, you kind of have to notice both. There's that part of me that's going to keep on judging. And the moment I don't judge it, I'll be removed from it. I'll see that that's just going on in front of me, as if mind is just a talking box that talks for the sake of talking. And self just kind of goes, have at it. The awareness goes, well, this emotion may feel like it has a lower vibration, but I don't have to resist it or reject it and label it. Mind will still continue to do that. So when any negative emotion arises inside, even in an awakened being, there might be something that arises with that emotion. Let's say it's shame, something like that. When that emotion surges inside, there might immediately be a knee-jerk response to that. No, I don't want to feel this. Some kind of wanting to close it down, push it back down. At the same time, there is also this, yes, I welcome you. You're allowed to exist in this body. And those aren't verbal conscious thoughts, of course. They're just kind of attitude. And the yes overrides the no. And you begin to experience an inclusive softening when you feel these vibrations that can begin to dissolve and transmute back into peace. The moment it's yes and no, you'll feel peace. You're only struggling because you're trying to pick one or the other. That's mind's conundrum, not yours. Mind's issue, not yours. I'll have a play with it and see what happens. So I've enjoyed all your questions, and thank you for your lovely comments as well. I really do appreciate it. Just want to say that you're all doing so amazing, much better than you'll give yourself credit for in your awakening. So can you treat yourself a little bit kinder? Can you treat yourself a little bit nicer? Can you talk to yourself a little bit more like the Buddha would than your mind would? And it'll make a huge difference. So as I said, if you do have a question for me this month, stick it underneath here, and then 1st of May or as soon as possible, I'll get round to looking at them. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Namaste.